Yeah, that's fine. No, no, so. Yes. Yes. Is he amazing? It's on here. A little bit more. Check it. Yeah. So, I'll introduce myself. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The Shaykh said he wanted to introduce me. I told him I would introduce myself. So my name is Asim Ahmed. That's my introduction, inshallah, and we'll begin after this. نحمد ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا قيل لهم آمنوا كما آمن الناس قالوا ونؤمن كما آمن السفهاء ألا إنهم هم السفهاء ولكن لا يعلمون صدق الله العظيم. It's an honor to be here again. I think I was here maybe 2 to 3 days before Ramadan last time I came. And because of the good opinion that the committee and the imams here have of me, they keep on calling me repeatedly, alhamdulillah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make their good opinion a reality and bless all of us for coming here. I know it's Saturday. It's the day where we have the most distractions from doing work of deen, from being in gatherings of deen, right? It's much easier on Saturday to be somewhere else than in the masjid. On the weekdays, it's a lot easier to be in the masjid. So the bigger sacrifice you make to attend these majalis on Saturday, the more reward you get, the more benefit we all get, and the more Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will put the blessing and the nur of this knowledge in our hearts. Because you only get knowledge according to the amount of sacrifice. And I've talked about this before as well in this place, that you only get knowledge according to the amount of sacrifice. The more sacrifice you make, the more knowledge Allah will bless you with, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see that a person is making effort in his way. Then accordingly, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him according to the amount of sacrifice that he made. And he mentions this in Quran Kareem where he says, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا. Whoever struggles in our path, we will show them our way. So if you make a little bit of struggle, you get a little. You make a lot of struggle, you get a lot. This is a Saturday, so you get more, right? Allahu Akbar. So today, we want to talk about the great Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiyallahu anhu. By modern standards, he would be considered at least a millionaire. We'll talk a little bit about his wealth later on. And in that sense, he relates better to us because we live in a very materialistic society, right? So we can relate to a millionaire. A Sahabi being a millionaire makes a lot more sense to us. We can connect with him better than a Sahabi who was an ascetic, who lived on his own, fasted throughout the day, and did qiyamul layl throughout the night. We wouldn't really connect with that because we're not at that level. So that's why I chose to talk about Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiyallahu anhu today. And we can look at his life from many different perspectives. I'm going to try to cover a little bit of everything so we get a more comprehensive picture of his life. But what I'm trying to aim for, and the objective of this, is to understand that the Sahaba Ridwanullah alayhim ajma'in, no matter how great their wealth was, how great the obstacles were that came between them and Allah, and wealth is a big obstacle that comes between us and Allah, our jobs, right? They always overcame those odds. They always overcame those obstacles, and it did not prevent them from gaining closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that gives us some level of encouragement and inspiration that if we have wealth, doesn't mean that we can't get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But sacrifice is required. Taqwa is required. Establishing a strong connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is required.
You need to switch this.
Okay. Look exactly the same. Right.
Some different settings. One is
Okay. That's how people are. They look exactly the same, but what makes the difference is what's inside the heart, right? If you look at this microphone and that one, they look exactly the same. I mean, circumference-wise and everything. But the settings on this are different, right? The same thing with the Sahaba and us. If you look at a Sahabi walking into this masjid today, no difference in terms of how they look and how we look. They were human beings, but their settings were different. What were their settings? Abdullah bin Masud radiallahu anhu talks about that in a mawquf narration. Mawquf narration basically means a statement of a sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, "Man kana mustannan falyastanna biman qad mata." If you're going to follow somebody, and we all like to follow somebody, whether we do it consciously or unconsciously. As children, they follow their parents, right? Without thinking, they copy them and imitate them in everything they do and everything they say. As we get older, we start being more conscientious about what path we're going to take in our life, who we look up to, who are our heroes, and how we want to follow their way. Most of the time, though, we don't really have any heroes, at least in this part of the world, because if you look at what people are looking at, they're looking at sports players, right? People are looking at sports players. Really good. But what do sports players have to offer in terms of becoming a better human being? Right? If you were to live with your, hero sports player for one day, okay, would you be able to live with him without noticing a million problems in terms of how he speaks, how he acts, his character, his language, millions of problems. But you're only looking at one thing. He plays well. And forget everything else. Right? Unfortunately, because we put our children in these type of environments, this is what they go after. And their vision is very narrow-minded, very narrow. They're only looking at a basketball player playing basketball. They don't look beyond that as what type of human being he is. How is he with his wife? How is he with his children? Right? And we hear all sorts of horrific stories of some of these people who we look up to. O.J. Simpson, right? A good example. And with so many others. But because they make a lot of money and we live in a materialistic society, therefore we look up to them. If we had an Islamic society, then we would be looking a little bit differently. Our perspective would be different. We wouldn't be looking at the one who has the most money. We'd be looking at the one who has the highest level of taqwa. That was the way it was in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Standards have changed, criteria have changed. This is what we've come to talk about, is Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf as a new standard of living, of looking how we should look up to and who should we look up to. Should we be looking up to basketball players, or we should be looking up to the Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majma'in? So this is why Abdullah bin Masud radiallahu anh says, "Man kana mustannan falyastanna biman qad mat." If you're going to follow somebody, then follow somebody who's passed away. Why? Because he says, فَإِنَّ الْحَيَّ لَا تُؤْمَنُ عَلَيْهِ الْفِتْنَةِ. Because the living people, as long as they are alive, they can fall into fitna. And if they fall into fitna, and you trusted them with your life, with your iman, and you wanted to follow their way, then one of two things happen. Either you start following them in their fitna, and you become maftoon as well, or you start losing your trust in people of iman, leaders of deen. They're all like that. You hear a scandal break out, all the scholars are like that, right? And then we become critical of the scholars of deen just because one did it, or two did it, or three did it. We say that, right? So the living can always fall into fitna, but the deceased never can. So he says, "Ulaika ashabu Muhammad." What he's talking about regarding the people who are dead, there's millions of people who are dead, but who is he talking about that we should follow? who have passed away before us. He's talking about the Ashab Muhammad. Why should we follow the Ashab Muhammad? كانوا خير هذه الأمة. خير هذه الأمة, they were the best of this ummah. أبرها قلوبا, had what? أبرها قلوبا, had the most pious and virtuous hearts. This is the new standard that's being set of who we should follow. So when we're looking for someone to follow, we look at what type of heart does he have? Not how much money does he have? What type of car does he have? What type of job does he have? How big is his house? No. How pious is he? وَأَعْمَقَهَا عِلْمًا, they have the most profound knowledge. Their knowledge is the deepest. Our knowledge that we gain from books is superficial knowledge. Their knowledge was deep because they didn't gain it through books. They gained it through suhbah. Suhbah of who? Of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The best way to gain knowledge of deen is not through books. It's through sitting in the company of pious people. So the most profound and deepest knowledge that anyone had was that of the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because they gained their knowledge through the suhbah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No books involved. Just being in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, sitting in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and being around him and watching him in everything that he did, and everywhere that he went, and everything that he said, made them the deepest in terms of their knowledge. قوم أختارهم الله لصحبة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم. This was a nation of people. He's referring to the Ashab of Muhammad صلى الله عليه وسلم, that the Sahaba were people who were chosen by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, what he means to say is that they were chosen ones. That's very important for us to understand. If you wanted to become a Sahabi, you can't go and get an interview and then you look at your skills are seen and your talents and your virtues. No, you're chosen. Allah wanted it, therefore. Big difference. When we go for a job, right, for a job interview, they look at our talent, they look at our skills, they look at our experience, right? But if they just choose us without any interview, we would consider ourselves lucky. He didn't check anything, he just chose us. Right? This was the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah didn't look at anything. He just chose them, and then He gave them the necessary qualities that they needed to become the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and worthy of His suhbah. So therefore, just like the Anbiya are chosen, likewise, who are chosen? The Sahaba. This is a part of our Aqidah, by the way. What's our Aqidah? Nubuwwah is not muqtasab. This is a part of our Aqidah. You cannot acquire prophethood through effort. You cannot acquire the suhbah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam through effort. You want to gain the highest level of taqwa and you want to gain the suhbah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam right now. How are you going to do it? You have to be in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And how were those people who became the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How did they become the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Did they choose to live in that time? Were they chosen for Iman? Otherwise, there were many like Abu Jahl who were not chosen. So we know that even being in the company of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a matter of appointment by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So no matter how much effort you made or struggle you made or sacrifices you made, you can't attain the level of the Sahaba of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Just like you can never become a Nabi just by your effort, just by your sacrifices. You could pray night and day and become the most pious person in the world, never commit a single sin. you still can't become a Nabi of Allah until you're chosen. This is our Aqidah. Right? This is something we need to remember, because there's many people who will come after Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam who claim Nabuwah, who are imposters. And sometimes we like to befriend these people. They're family friends. Right? They live amongst us. They have their own quote-unquote masajid as well. We have to be careful about such people, because their belief is that Nabuwah can be attained through effort. Our belief is Nabuwah cannot be attained through any form of effort. Likewise with the companions of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. Second thing, and then we'll begin with the life of Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiallahu anhu. Second thing is, if anybody disbelieves the Sahaba of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, by corollary, meaning the byproduct of this disbelief in the Sahaba is, you will lose your iman in Quran and you will lose your iman in the Sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Why? Because the only people that conveyed to us the message of the Quran and the Sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam were the Sahaba. So they're the bridge between us and Allah and His Rasul. If you destroy that bridge, how do you get to Allah and His Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? Gone. So your belief in Quran is destroyed. Your belief in the Sunnah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is gone. Right or wrong? This is why we have to be very careful in being critical about the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim ajma'in. It's a part of our iman and our belief that the Sahaba were not perfect. We don't consider them infallible like the Anbiya, but we do consider them maghfur. They're all forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Hazrat Shaykh al-Hadith Muhammad Zakaria rahmatullah alayhi says, the Sharia would never have been fulfilled and completed if it had not been for the Sahaba being imperfect. Because laws were passed in the Sharia according to situations. So if a Sahabi made a mistake, a law of Sharia was passed, an ayah was revealed, a hadith was mentioned. According to that, if the Sahabi had not done that, there would be no ayah, there would be no hadith, and we'd have no guidance in the matter. So the purpose of them being fallible was to complete the Sharia of Islam. Therefore, that is their contribution to the Ummah of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that they made their lives a means of making the Sharia complete. That's a big what? They gave up their honor for that. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them do things that sometimes we wouldn't even do. But we have an example of, for example, Ma'iz radiallahu anhu committed a major sin. He came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah, I committed a major sin. Please stone me. Please do whatever you want with me. And the hukum came, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did accordingly. But he was so regretful that he came himself. So even when they did something wrong, the level of taqwa that they had was such that they felt guilt and remorse to a level that we can't even imagine. That they're willing to give their lives up for it to fulfill the Sharia. So if they have this big fadl upon us that they became a means of fulfillment of the Sharia and a source of guidance for us, how can we start finding mistakes and faults in them? We have to be very careful about this. Now, beginning with the life of Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf. Ar-Rahman. What does Abdur Rehman mean? Servant of Rahman, right? Now, I know you're going to say Allah because Rahman means Allah. But remember, the Arabs did not know the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They knew Allah, but they didn't know Rahman. They didn't know Rahim. They didn't know Malik. They didn't know Quddus, Salam, Al-Mu'min. These were taught after they accepted Islam. Right? So, that means that his name initially was not Abdur Rahman, because there's even an ayah of Quran in this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قال وَمَا الرحمن. What is this وَمَا الرحمن? What is this Rahman? We don't know Rahman. We don't know what Rahman means. So his name before was not Abdur Rahman because Arabs didn't know Rahman. His name was, there's two opinions, either Abdul Kaaba or Abd Amr. When he accepted Islam, he came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he mentions فَتُسِمِّيتُ حِينَ أَسْلَمْتُ عَبْدُ الرَّحْمَنِ فَتُسُمِّيتُ حِينَ أَسْلَمْتُ عَبْدُ الرَّحْمَنِ, that when I became Muslim, then Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave me the name Abdur Rahman. He had a best friend. Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf had a best friend. That best friend was one of the biggest arch enemies of Islam. Who was he? Umayyah bin Khalaf. Umayyah bin Khalaf was one of the biggest arch enemies of Islam. You heard about the torture that happened to Bilal, right? Radiallahu anhu. Who was the cause of all that torture? Umayyah bin Khalaf. Right? But he was best friends with Abdur Rehman bin Auf before Islam in Jahiliyyah. And they remained best friends even after. Not best friends in the sense that they were always by each other's side and always there for each other. Obviously, Abdur Rehman bin Auf, radiallahu anhu, after he accepted Islam, when the order came to migrate, he left. Right? He left his friend behind. But friends in the sense that they sat together, they spent time together, and they were good friends. So when he accepted Islam, Abdur Rehman bin Auf says, Umayyah bin Khalaf, he was my friend in Mecca. وَكَانَ اسْمِي عَبْدِ Amr, and I became Abdur Rehman. He said to me one day, he said, Ya Abd Amr, أَرَغِبْتَ عَنْ اسْمِ سَمَّاكَهُ أَبَوَاكَ. What's this Abdur Rehman? I don't understand. Right? Have you turned away from the name that was given to you by your forefathers? Your name was Abd Amr, Abdul Kaaba. Why did you change your name? What is this Rahman? Abdur Rahman. So he said, have you changed your name? He said, yes, I've changed my name and I have nothing to do. Abdur Rehman bin Auf says, I have nothing to do with my forefathers. I left their ways. Now I follow Islam. I've submitted myself to the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't care about my forefathers anymore. So Umayyah bin Khalaf says in response, he says, La a'arifur Rahman. I don't recognize Rahman. فَاجْعَلْ بَيْنِي وَبَيْنَكَ شَيْئًا أَدْعُوكَ بِهِ. And I will never call you by your name. Therefore, find another name that I can use to call you by. See how stubborn he was? I will not accept Abdur Rahman as your name. He's his best friend, but he doesn't have enough respect for him to call him by the name that he's chosen for himself because he hates Islam so much. Abdur Rehman bin Auf's response was, وَأَمَّا أَنْتَ فَلَا تُجِيبُنِي بِإِسْمِكَ الْأَوَّلِ. Let me tell you something. If you're not going to call me by Abdur Rehman, that's fine. But you better not call me by the name that I was given by my forefathers in Jahiliyyah, because I'm not going to listen to you. And it's mentioned in the historical narrations that whenever he would call his friend Abdur Rehman and he would say, Abdul Kaaba, Abdul Kaaba, Abdur Rehman bin Auf would completely ignore him as if he doesn't even exist. And then finally, when he realized he's not listening, he said, okay, Abdul Ilah. This was the name that was chosen between both of them. They agreed upon Abdul Ilah. Ilah meaning the God, the servant of the God, but still not Abdullah, still not Abdur Rehman. What it tells you, the reason why I'm sharing with you this little anecdote is to show that where Abdur Rehman bin Auf was so strong on his iman that he was not willing to surrender it for his friend, not compromise his deen or his name for his friend. Umayyah bin Khalf was no less pakka, strong and strident in his kufr. The reason I mention this is sometimes we change our names because we're shameful and embarrassed to say our names out in the open, especially amongst non-Muslims. So Muhammad becomes Mo. Right or wrong? Right? Why do we do that? It's a sign of weakness or no? So I met one brother, this is years ago, at a office depot. And he was working at the front register. And I didn't know who he was. It just so happened that the computers went down, the whole system shut down, and we were sitting there waiting. And he felt uncomfortable because there's a long line, everybody's looking at him. Like, when's your system going to start up so we can go? Pay and go. So he felt that, the guilt and all eyes are on him. So he starts, talking to us to kind of relieve his own discomfort. So I noticed as he was talking, he had a little tattoo right here on his left forearm, and it said Shayma. That's not American name, Shayma. I'm thinking, wait a second here. I think he's a Muslim. All right? Shayma was the name of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's foster sister. Halima Sa'adiyya radiyallahu anha, the one who gave milk to Rasulullah when he was a child, her biological daughter's name was Shayma. Right? So I knew that this boy was a Muslim. So I said to him, "What's that on your forearm?" So he's like, "Oh, that's my grandmother's name." And then he realized that I knew. And he says, "Oh, Assalamu alaikum." And then I looked at the badge and it said Mo. Trying to hide our identity. And look at Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf. His best friend. I don't care. If you're not going to call me by my name, my Muslim name, I don't even want to know you. I don't even want to know you. So part of preservation of our identity is our iman and the strength of our iman. Anyways, what type of relationship did he have with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam? I just want to narrate one story which is related to after he made the hijrah. Remember, Abdur Rehman bin Auf was not a rich man from the very beginning. We have two people among the Sahaba who are millionaires. Okay? There may have been more. There's two that are well known. Number one, Uthman ibn Affan. Number two, Abdur Rehman bin Auf. Okay? Uthman ibn Affan was a wealthy man from the very beginning, even in times of Jahiliyyah. Abdur Rehman bin Auf became wealthy after he migrated to Medina Munawwara. He's not known for his wealth while he was in Makkah Mukarram. So this story that I'm sharing with you is related to after the migration. Now he's a wealthy man. Okay? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after one of the wars, was distributing spoils: gold, silver, dinar, dirham, camels, goats, sheep. And he was giving more to some, little bit less to some, and then others were getting nothing. Right? So Abdur Rehman bin Auf was sitting in the masjid and he's crying. And Umar ibn Khattab walks into the masjid and he sees Abdur Rehman ibn Auf crying. فَلَقِيَهُ فَقَالَ مَا يَبْكِيكَ? Why are you crying? So Abdur Rehman bin Auf says, أَعْطَى رَسُولُ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم رَهْطًا وَأَنَا مَعَهُمْ وَلَمْ يُعْطِنِي شَيْئًا. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was distributing spoils and he gave something to everyone, But he didn't give me anything. Now somebody would say, that's not nice. You shouldn't be looking for after wealth, desiring wealth. He was already a rich man. He didn't need that money. When we talk about how much money he had, you'll be astounded, mind blown. He didn't need the money. It was the fact that, is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam unhappy with me? That's why he's not giving to me. So his fear was that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is angry with him. That's why he's not giving to me. He's ignoring me. So it tells you the love that he had for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know how children, when their mothers are angry, to make them happy, they start acting really cute. Why? Because they're worried that the mother is angry. Because they love their mother. So I got to make her happy. So they start doing all sorts of different things to make them happy. So this is exactly Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, who is very worried that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is unhappy with me. So what does Umar ibn Khattab do? He goes straight to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فَدَخَلَ عُمَرُ عَلَى رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صلى الله عليه وسلم فَأَخْبَرَهُ خَبْرَ عبد الرحمن. He informs him of Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiallahu anhu mentioned, and that he was crying in the masjid. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لَيْسَ بِي سَخْطَةٌ عَلَيْهِ. I'm not angry with him. وَلَكِنَّنِي وَكَلْتُهُ إِلَى إِيمَانِي. But I have entrusted him to his iman. Meaning the people that I was giving more money was because they had weak iman. I wanted to bring them closer to the deen. Him, I don't have any worries. MashaAllah, he's a man of taqwa. But it tells you his connection with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now going back, this was an anecdote related to after migration. I wanted to go in an order. So I'm going to go back to when he first accepted Islam. His name was changed. What happened after that? How did he accept Islam? I should have even gone before this. I actually mentioned this before. How do you even accept Islam? So there's 5 people among the Sahaba who accepted Islam through Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh. And all those 5 are from Ashara Mubashara. So Abu Bakr Siddiq had a strong influence over Meccan society. This is very important for us to remember. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was known as Al-Amin and what? As-Sadiq, right? So everybody respected him for being trustworthy and being the truthful. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a very quiet man. He didn't socialize with people much. Which means that in order for the deen to spread, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam needed some extra hands who were very social and had connections with the Meccan society. Abu Bakr Siddiq had those connections for 2 reasons. Number 1, he was a genealogist. What's a genealogist? So the Arabs really looked up to genealogists, right? A genealogist is a person who memorizes your ancestry and knows your father going 15 generations, 25 generations back. And that's how the Arabs were. They knew not just their grandfather, great-father, they went all the way up. So 2 people would come to him and say, are we related? Who's your father? Who's your father? Okay. Who's your grandfather? Who's your grandfather? Yes, you are. How? Then he would tell you exactly where you meet up. In fact, he even knew the genealogy of horses. Right? So people would come to him to ask about their ancestry. Right? This was very important in tribal Arab. Knowing my blood, where am I from? This was very important. This was a mark of their honor. So that was number 1. Number 2 was he was a master interpreter of dreams. So people would come to him for interpretation of dreams, and he was good. You know who the second biggest interpreter of dreams was in Makkah? Master of interpretation of dreams. Abu Bakr Siddiq was 1. Second one was who? Abu Jahl. You don't have to have iman to have good interpretation of dreams, my brothers. That's just the talent Allah gives to certain people. Abu Jahl was one, Abu Bakr Siddiq was the second. Okay? So Abu Bakr Siddiq used these two, right, skills that he had to bring people closer to Islam. Because people would come to him a lot. One of them was Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas. He had a dream, and that's how he converted. Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiallahu anhu. He had heard about Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He came to Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu, and he accepted Islam instantly. Another one who accepted Islam through him was Zubair ibn al-Awwam, Sa'id bin Zayd, Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, as I already mentioned. And one more. Who was it? Not Abu Ubaidah. He's one of the only ones who was not among the Ashara Bashara. Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu anhu, the third Khalifa. Abu Ubaidah is one of the only ones who is mentioned that he did not accept Islam through Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu amongst Ashara Bashara. And there are many more, but amongst Ashara Bashara, these five are the main ones. Anyways, so Abdur Rehman bin Auf had a strong connection with Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. Allahu Akbar. After he migrated to Medina Munawwara, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam established a connection between one Muhajir with one Ansar. Why? Because the Muhajirin didn't have anything to take care of themselves. No finances. They left their homes behind. They left their families behind. They left their assets behind, their properties behind. They literally had nothing on them. It was a big sacrifice they made, right? We made that sacrifice from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Saudi Arabia, wherever, for the sake of Deen too, right? When we came here. Or was it something else? Imagine making that sacrifice only for the Deen of Allah, leaving everything behind, right? So they made that sacrifice, but now they still needed their basic necessities fulfilled. Shelter, food. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam established ties between the Muhajir Sahaba and the Ansar Sahaba. So Abdur Rehman bin Auf was connected with a great Sahabi from the Ansar. His name was Sa'ad bin Rabi' radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Anybody heard his name before? He died in the Battle of Uhud. His daughter was born after he was martyred. His wife, Sa'ad bin Rabi''s wife, was pregnant with Sa'ad. She's known as Sa'ad. Sa'ad bin Rabi' radiallahu anhu's daughter. So when Sa'ad bin Rabi' radiallahu anhu died, his wife, when she had her child, Abu Bakr Siddiq adopted her. She grew up, he married her to Mu'adh bin Jabal, and she named her son after her father, Sa'ad bin Rabi', and she became known as Sa'ad. So it shows you the network of connection between the Sahaba, how they would take care of each other and take care of the children of the martyrs. Right? So there's many narrations of Sa'ad from Abu Bakr Siddiq. Why? Because she was raised in his house. But when you read the hadith, you don't know these things. When you read the biographies, then you realize, oh, okay, I see the connection now. Anyways, so Sa'ad bin Rabi' radiallahu anhu was a great Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam from the Ansar, extremely generous and open-hearted. He says to Abdur Rehman bin Auf radiallahu anhu, he says, Abdur Rehman, listen, I'm going to split my wealth and my property into half. You get one half and I get the other. Literally half. And I have two wives. I'll give talaq to one of them and you can marry her after her iddah is complete. Literally. He was giving half of everything he had, everything he owned, everything he possessed to Abdur Rehman bin Auf radiallahu anhu. For what benefit? For the sake of Allah. That's it. Ajib. Right? Abdur Rehman bin Auf was an honorable man. He said, no, just show me the way to the market. I'll start some business. Maybe I'll make a little bit of money. And inshallah, things will work out for me. Jazakallah khair. So, slowly, he established himself in the market. And which market was this, by the way? Anybody know? The market in Medina Munawwara was known as the market of Banu Qaynuqa'. Okay? This is important. Banu Qaynuqa' was a Jewish tribe, and they controlled the market and the economy of Medina Munawwara. So if anybody wanted to open a store, start a business there, they charged them a fee. Like, you know, when you go to Amazon, you want to sell something, you want to open a store, you pay Amazon a fee, right? So Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf had to open his business, he had to pay them a fee. And that's why they were one of the richest of the Jewish tribes, and they're the people who controlled the whole economy of Medina Munawwara. All the biggest estates, all the most expensive land, and the wells, right? The most valuable was the wells, where all the water is in the middle of the desert. That's the most expensive place. All owned by the Yahud. All right? So, anyways, Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf established himself in the market, made a little bit of a profit, came back, and got married right away. And it was a tradition amongst the Ansar that when a bride and groom got married, they would put some color on them. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam saw the color and he said, Mahyam, what's this? And he said, I just got married, Ya Rasulullah. Why didn't you invite me? No, he didn't say that. Huh? Why didn't you invite me? No. He was in Medina Munawwara. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is there. But Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam didn't attend the nikah. Not only did not attend the nikah, he didn't invite him to officiate the nikah. Right? That you come, we want barakah and blessing in it. So please, you officiate the nikah. There'll be blessing in it. Right? This is not the way the Sahaba worked. Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is in Medina Munawwara. He didn't invite him for the nikah. What does that tell you about simplicity in the Sahaba? How simple their nikah were. Right? What type of nikahs do we hold today? How many banquet halls do we book? How much money do we spend? How much debt do we put on ourselves? Right? These are all things to learn from. Right? This is why I was saying we got to follow the ways of the Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majma'in. So Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the first question he asked him was, what did you give her in mahar? What was her mahar? Huh? So he said, wazna nawat min dhahab, about a date seed of gold. Date seed of gold. Not too much. But that means he was doing better, because he had nothing when he came from Makkah Mukarramah. Now he had something. And Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, looks like he has a little bit of money. Awlim walau bishatin. Do a walima. Call everybody. Huh? Even if it's just one, go. So the walima is sunnah, but the nikah itself, what? It's not sunnah to invite everybody for the nikah, but it is sunnah to invite for the walima. To save money, people do nikah and the walima the same day. Now, let's talk a little bit about his money. Okay? This Sahabi had what we call the Midas touch. You know what the Midas touch means, right? So, 1 dinar is a gold coin. 1 dirham is a silver coin. Let's remember that. Every dinar was 22 carats of gold. And it was equivalent in weight to 4.25 grams. Okay, just keep this in mind. 4.25 grams. And every dirham was equivalent to 2.9 grams of pure silver. Pure silver. Okay. Now, when he passed away, he had 4 wives. Every wife got 80,000 dinar. Okay. 80,000 dinar. So if you do 80,000 times 4.25 grams, huge sum. But I had to break it down because we don't measure gold in grams anymore. We measure it in ounces, troy ounces. So it came out to a very large sum, like 11 million something ounces, right? So every single ounce of gold is equivalent today, $1,943, $1,943 each ounce, right? So if he was giving 80,000 dinar, which is equivalent to 11 million ounces, and each ounce is $1,943, how much was he giving to each wife? According to our times, right? Each wife was getting this. We're talking in the multi-millions, even beyond that, okay? Yeah, you could say inflation, all that stuff. Still, okay? But remember, wives only get 1/8. So this was only 1/8 of all his assets. So the 80,000 that each wife was getting, okay, after he passed away was 1/8 of his total assets. And if that 80,000 times 4, okay, was equivalent to our modern times to what? You can do the math. It comes out to over $1 billion. Okay? Then you can imagine how much wealth he really had. Okay? Therefore, it's mentioned in the riwayat that Aisha Siddiqa radiallahu ta'ala anha says that I heard Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, يَدْخُلُ Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf al-Jannata habwan. Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf will enter Jannah habwan. What does habwan mean? What does habwan mean? It's a certain way of sitting, right? Habwan means like this, right? Can you walk when you're in that position? So if you're going to Jannah in that position, what does that mean? You're going slow, right? The point that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was making was that since he had a lot of money, there's going to be accountability, right? That's scary for us. Because if we consider the ummah in this part of the world and how much wealth we have, even if it's very little, it's still a lot more than most of the ummah across the world. Africa, Asia. I think the only exception would be Saudi Arabia and the oil countries, right? But literally, we have a lot more, right? And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks about each and everything, as Allah says in Quran Kareem, وَلَا تُسْأَلُنَّ يَوْمَئِذٍ عَنِ النَّعِيمِ, He's going to ask you about every single blessing. And then Zubair ibn al-Awwam said, Al-Aswadani, ya Rasulullah, even water and dates, because that's all the Sahaba had. Water and dates, that's what they used to eat night and day because they had no food, no money. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, yeah. That's why we always need to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His rahmah. Somebody says, oh, I do, tahajjud every night for the past 25 years. I've never missed Isha with Jamaat. Yeah, but how are you that's not enough to pay back for what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts holding you accountable for everything, you're gone. In fact, the hadith even says, how much time we have left? Man nuqisha udhiba. The hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, is that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts interrogating you, the adab has begun. Because if He starts taking account for every second and every penny, you're done. So just hope that He doesn't start interrogating you in detail for every single thing. He just asks you the general questions, like when you cross the border, they ask you general questions. Do you have any firearms? Where are you going? How long are you staying for? When are you going to be back? That's a basic question. But when they start getting suspicious and they start interrogating you, then they just send you in. And then you could be there for hours, and then anything can happen after that. So the first step is the basic questions, right? If you pass that, you're good. But if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts doing munaqasha, which means He starts really taking into account everything, then you're done. Then it doesn't matter you prayed tahajjud your whole life. Doesn't matter if you didn't commit a single sin. You're done. That's why we always make the dua, Allahumma hasibni hisaban yasira. Oh Allah, make my hisab easy. Make my hisab easy. We should always make this dua. I don't know why we think we're above the law maybe. That, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive us. He's all forgiving. He's all merciful. If Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf is not being let off, and he's one of the Ashara Mubashara, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's yardstick is justice. Even if Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf is one of the Ashara Mubashara, even if he's one of the great Sahaba, the rule is everybody has to be held accountable. Doesn't matter who it is, including the Anbiya, even the Anbiya. So where do we fall in? Therefore, Allahumma hasibni hisaban yasira. Allahumma hasibni hisaban yasira. Allahumma hasibni hisaban yasira. And always making tawbah for our sins. One of the biggest problems that we have nowadays is not that the problem is not that we commit sin. People committed sin in the past too. We commit sin too. The big difference between us and the people of the past is we commit sin and we justify it. When we do something wrong, we live in a society where we justify it. Some people are just born like that. This is what the LGBTQ says. And some of our people are saying the same thing. They're just born like that. Right or wrong? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned one of the prophecies. A time will come when in my ummah there will be people who will drink alcohol, but they will change its name. In other words, they'll justify it. Oh, this is not really alcohol. What is it? Oh, this is that. Right? Justification, which means that the heart has become so dark that you can't even make istighfar that I made a mistake. Ya Allah, I submit. I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done this. No, you're justifying it. It's right. What's wrong with it? What do I do wrong? That means the door of tawbah has been closed for you. That's azab of Allah in itself. If the door of tawbah has been closed for you, that's a form of azab right there. And it's going to lead to a bigger adab. That's why it's very important that we always make istighfar and always make tawbah when we do something wrong. And don't try to justify it. It's okay. Allah is Rahim. Allah is Ghafoor. Don't say that. I made a mistake. It's between you and Allah anyways. Nobody else is going to find out. Make tawbah, do istighfar. Inshallah, Allah will clear everything away. And ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make you strong so that you don't ever do it again. I don't have the strength, Ya Allah. I ask you. And then Shaitan comes to you and he says, how many times are you going to keep on making tawbah? You do the same thing over and over again. You know why he's telling you that? Because he doesn't want you to keep on making tawbah and istighfar, because he knows the guilt will one day make you stop doing it. It's just a matter of time. So keep on doing it. Don't stop. You did it again, make tawbah istighfar again. You fell into it again, make tawbah istighfar again. Don't let Shaitan put you on in this trap that, you know what? No point. Keep on doing it again. There's no point in doing it. He wants to lead you to the way that, you know what? This is just, I can't get rid of this. This is my problem. This is who I am. This is who I am. It's a part of my nature. It's innate. Allah Ta'ala has made me that way. Right? This is where we've gone now. And we're headed towards more destruction. This is the big problem of the heart. When we don't even have the ability to have nadama, remorse and regret. If a person doesn't have remorse and regret for something he does wrong, that's a big problem. Big problem. Like I was mentioning the story of a Sahabi who made a mistake, came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, punish me. Any way you want, punish me. It means death, I'll take death. Right? Allahu Akbar. We were talking about Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiallahu anhu's wealth. When Aisha radiallahu anha's narration of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam reached Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, he came straight to Aisha Siddiqa and he says, Ya oh my mother, inni ushhiduk, I make you witness, annaha bi'ahmaliha wa ahlasiha wa aqtabiha fi sabilillah azza wa jal. All this wealth that has just come from a foreign land, I give it all in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What was he talking about? So basically what happened was, Aisha radiallahu anha, one day after Dhuhr, heard the earth under her shaking. It was loud and it was like an earthquake. She said, what's going on? And you would say, oh, it's an earthquake. It wasn't an earthquake. It was thousands upon thousands of camels coming from Sham and Egypt and all over the place. And this was the caravan of the wealth of who? Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf. And she's like, SubhanAllah. And she remembered that hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and she mentioned it. And as soon as she mentioned it, and then Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf radiallahu anhu found out, he says, all these thousands of camels with all the dinar, all the dirham, all the daqiq and burra, there was full of grains and full of food stuff and full of all sorts of things that he was planning on selling. All this millions of dollars worth of what? Commodity. I give it all in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? He didn't even measure it. Right? When we put money in the donation box, right? We open our wallet and we look, okay, where's the five? Where's the five? Where's the five? We got 100 there. No, not that one, not that one, not that one, right? There's 100, there's a 50. No, that's too much too. Can it ever be that you open your wallet and you don't even look? Okay, whatever comes out, that's it. It might be hard because when you go home, you say, oh, painful, man. I knew there was 100 in there. I knew there was a 50 in there. Right? Give according to your means. We don't have that level of iman, but give more. Right? He didn't even measure it. All in path of Allah. That's it. Done. SubhanAllah. From a Western point of view or a modern point of view, that's a loss of a lot of wealth. But their focus was on the akhirah, not on the dunya. That's the difference between Sahaba and us. Focus is on the akhirah. Our focus is on dunya. When we raise our children, we think of making them doctors. We think of making them what? Engineers. We think of making them what? Because we're not looking at akhirah. We're looking at what? Dunya. If we think of making them huffaz, then we're thinking of akhirah. Right? Because you don't get any benefit from hafiz. Your child become a hafiz of no benefit to you from a materialistic standpoint. No benefit. Right? But engineer, doctor, there's two benefits. Benefit number one, admit it. This is our problem. Right? Benefit number one is, when I get old, who's going to take care of me? Number one. Number two, what does your son do? Oh, he's a doctor. In other words, people need to know, I'm the father of a doctor. Image, status. We come from a very intelligent family. We're an intellectual family. My son is a doctor, I'm flying a doctor, one's an architect, one's this, one's that. Right? Image. Image is very important. Status. I tell everybody. People say, mashallah, mashallah. Right? You don't get any of that from Hafiz. In fact, you get the opposite. People get on your case. Oh, you're wasting your son's life. Huh? Wasting your son's life. What are you making Hafiz? What are you going to get out of it? Your focus is on the akhirah, their focus is on the dunya. I've never seen a hafiz who's not become successful in the dunya as well. But I've seen doctors driving taxis. I have. It's all in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we forget that Allah is Razzaq, then we start making these type of mistakes. That Allah is the provider. I'm not saying you can't make your son a doctor, you can't make your son an engineer. What I'm saying is, let your child go. If he wants to become a doctor, doctor. He wants to become a plumber, let him become a plumber. Your focus should only be one thing. His source of earning has to be 100% halal. That's it. 100% halal. Why? Because that's akhirah. If he earns haram, what's going to happen? The food that he eats, the clothes that he wears, and the clothes that he gives to his children and his wife, and the house that he makes, right? All of it's going to be haram. And according to the hadith of Muslim, anna yustajabu lahu. Allah is not going to accept any of his du'as. I'm not going to accept any of his ibadah. His blood is poisoned with haram. Right? Anyways, going back to the main point. Inshallah, we only have 10 minutes left. I'm going to jump to have many, many stories here. We cover this in like 8 to 9 sessions of 30-minute segments every single Thursday in Buffalo, New York. Because I want people to be attached to the Sahaba Ridwan Alayhim Ajma'in. I want our children to make them their role models, be inspired by their lives. Right? You will say, your heart will admit that there's no comparison to them in any basketball player. There's not even a comparison to be made. Or any rich man, or the richest man of today. Right? To be successful in the dunya, you can be an animal. You could be a human being, but an animal. Right? Sleeping around with so many different people, acting like a madman. We see all this happening. Right? There's autistic people who lack emotion completely. Right? They have no emotion, but they do very well in the dunya because the way their brain is wired. Like they have no sense of feeling, no sense of emotion. They're like robots in a way. They're like robots, literally. They have no sense of feeling. But they do amazing in the dunya because of that one skill that they have. His math is another level, right? Or he's amazing in investment, right? But he can't function as a human being other than that. Which tells you to be a human being has nothing to do with being successful in the dunya. It's totally different things. You see somebody successful, that means he's a great human being? No. Right? No sign. This is something we need to remember. Anyways, one last incident I'm going to mention. I'm going to jump to the end. Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was assassinated. We all know that. Where? In Masjid al-Nabawi. That was the dua that he made, actually. He made a dua. And it was, the dua contained 2 parts. Number 1, he wanted to be martyred, number 1, and he wanted to be martyred in Medina Munawwara. But he would often say when he made this dua, I don't know how it's going to be accepted, but everything is in the hands of Allah. Why? Why do you think he believed that this dua could not, or theoretically speaking, would not be accepted? It was irrational. Because Medina Munawwara was the capital of the Islamic Empire. It was the most secure place in the whole Islamic Empire, like Washington, D.C. You can't even fly your drone in Washington, D.C. within like a 25-mile radius, even though there's no airport nearby. Why? Like a little drone, like this 249 gram drones, like that's going to kill somebody, you can't fly it. Security. So he's in Medina Munawwara, the most secure place in the Islamic Empire. So what's the likelihood of somebody trying to kill him? But it happened. At Fajr time, and he was not reciting Wala Asr, Innal Insana Lafi Khusr. No, Fajr used to start from Ghalas in the beginning time and used to end near Asfar, which means when the sun was about to come out. So Surah Yusuf he was reciting on the day when he was martyred. And the person who killed him, his name was Abu Lu'lu, right? And he had double-edged sword, not double-edged, sorry, dagger with two edges, okay? Two corners. And he had made it himself because he was a blacksmith and a carpenter, and he had many other skills as well. And there's a whole story behind it. I won't go into all that. So he came while Umar ibn Khattab was leading the salah, and he started stabbing people to get to the front line. There was many lines. And obviously the congregation was huge, hundreds of people. So he cut through and he stabbed about 13 to 15 people according to historical narration. 7 of them were martyred until he finally got to Umar ibn Khattab. And then he stabbed him from the back in the stomach and the abdomen 10, 15 times. What does this have to do with Abdur Rehman ibn Auf radiallahu anh? Well, when Umar ibn Khattab fell, he said, Akalni al-kalbu. The dog has eaten me, meaning a man has killed me. And the first thing he did before he fell was grab the hand of the man right behind him, Abdur Rehman ibn Auf, وَقَدَّمَهُ لِيُصَلِّي. And he brought him forward to lead the salah. Who? Abdur Rehman ibn Auf radiallahu anh, which tells you that he was standing in the first saf, right behind Amir al-Mu'mineen, and the front lines were reserved for who? The highest, right? And number 2, the level of connection and trust and belief that Umar ibn Khattab had in who? Abdur Rehman ibn Auf, that he's telling him to replace him. Do you know why? Why? There may be multiple reasons. There's one reason that comes to mind. And this goes to another incident during the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Once Rasulullah went with the Sahaba ridwanullahi ajma'in, and he said, I'll be back shortly. He went off to do sulah, mediate between 2 tribes. Asr time was going. Sahaba were seeing the sun is going down. We haven't prayed our Asr. We're waiting for Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So they finally appointed Abdur Rehman ibn Auf to lead the salah. He was leading who? Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali radiallahu anhum, the Imam of all the Sahaba. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam returned and he saw the salah has started, he stood behind and the Sahaba started, gesturing and making noise to Abdur Rehman ibn Auf. Move back. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is here. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, continue the salah. What you did was good. You prevented the Asr salah from becoming qada. So Abdur Rehman bin Auf is the only Sahabi besides Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anh, who has ever led the final messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in salah. Only Sahabi besides Abu Bakr Siddiq. And there's still some ikhtilaf with Abu Bakr Siddiq. There's no ikhtilaf regarding Abdur Rehman bin Auf. That this Sahabi of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam led Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in salah. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was his muqtadi. Now Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu is telling him when he falls, you are leading of all people. Who? Because Abdur Rehman bin Auf radiallahu anhu was also the Imam of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at one time. So he has more right over this place than anybody else. And yet he was a millionaire. Right? He didn't let his dunya come between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And look at the level of trust of the awliya of that time. Abu Bakr Siddiq had in him. Umar ibn Khattab had him. Uthman ibn Affan had him. Ali ibn Abi Talib had him. To the extent that when Umar ibn Khattab was stabbed, he lived for 3 days after he was hurt and attacked. He appointed a council of 6 people to choose next Khalifa. Of those 6 people, one of them was Abdur Rehman bin Auf. Abdur Rehman bin Auf told the rest of the 5, I will choose the Khalifa among you. I won't be a Khalifa myself. So he made the final choice. And they all agreed because they accepted him. Because he was the only person to lead Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in salah, amongst many of the other virtues which we didn't talk about. But it tells you that you can have a lot of wealth, but if it doesn't come between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the love of dunya is not in your heart, then you still can get close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In fact, it's a bigger sacrifice because you have more challenges to face. Poor people have nothing, they will turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A rich man, أَرْرَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى إِنَّا إِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ الرُّجْعَى. Right? Abu Jahl, he thought he was the most powerful, he was wealthy. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, istaghna. You think you're all big and bad and independent? You don't have any need of me? Because of your wealth, because of your power? They used to call him Abu al-Hakam. Abu Jahl was known as what? We call him Abu Jahl. The Arabs used to call him what? Abu al-Hakam. Abu al-Hakam was like a respectful title given to him. Hakam means like a judge between two people. They had a lot of respect for him. Rasulullah changed that to what? Abu Jahl. Because he forgot that no human being is ever independent. No matter how much wealth you have, no matter how great your status is, and how powerful you are, you're always dependent on Allah. This is our belief, but this is how we have to start living. The more we start living like the Sahaba, reading about the Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majmain, the more we'll be inspired to live like them. To understand and realize that we are dependent beings. Don't let our wealth and our power and our houses and our cars get the better of us and get to our heads. You know, people get into nice cars and they start like behaving different, right? The way he walks out and talks. Have you noticed it? Have you noticed it? I'm not talking about Muslims only, even amongst non-Muslims. The attitude changes because it gets to our head. Now with Abdur Rehman Ibn Auf, that's why our scholars give the example, before I finish, is that, you know, you have to live in this dunya, right? You have to live in this dunya. There's no way you can live without it. But you can't allow it to enter in your heart. And it's just like the example of water. You need ships to bring made in China products here, right? Otherwise, your made in China products won't come. All Walmart will be closed down by, right? All those ships that are bringing that cargo from all over the world so that we can get stuff on our shelves is all coming on water, right? But if that water goes into that cargo ship, are we going to get those products? No. So water is good when it's under the ship, not when it's inside the ship. So dunya is good as long as it's outside of the heart. And you use it for your good, but it's not inside of the heart. That's the difference between us and the Sahaba Ridwanullahi Majmain. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. جزاكم الله خيرا.